Okay, I've just sent out just an image showing a theoretical with what we have adopted in Jamaica. So again, the x-axis shows your severity from low to high. The y-axis shows your frequency. And let's start at the bottom. We continue to use budgetary reallocation as a strategy. That's not something, well, first of all, let me begin by showing that we retain certain risks, and those risks are risks that we bear, and that's why it's called retention. And then there's certain risks that we transfer. And you'll notice that we transfer things that are less frequent. All right, so it's the lower frequency events that are transferred. The higher frequency occurrences we retain. Now, the bottom of the strategy, which are really high frequency events, things that has happened each year, you always retain the right or the need maybe for budgetary reallocation, but you want to limit that. That can't be your only strategy, or else your development will be retarded and hampered, as has been our experience. The layer above that, we have a natural disaster fund, and this does not represent Jamaica's strategy. As I said, our strategy is very close to this, but it's just the easiest way for me to very quickly illustrate what we are, something that's very close to what we're doing. We have a contingency fund and a natural disaster fund, but the natural disaster fund is new and it needs time to build. But the idea here is that your national range of low severity to high severity events, but things that threshold. Above that, in our retention strategy, we have our contingent credit line, and the reason why we describe it as retention is that the contingent credit line is credit. It's a loan that at some point needs to be repaid. That you negotiate in advance. The terms are known in advance, and it automatically triggers in the event of a natural disaster. The amount that becomes available is dependent on the severity of the natural disaster. And if a storm is really severe, then you may have to go beyond your contingent credit line and access other post-disaster indebtedness. So again, this is a part of retention because this risk is ours. It's funds that we are ultimately going to have to repay. But you're not going to be able to refinance or to finance all of your relief and recovery. And that first tweet should really say relief and recovery. You're not going to finance all your relief and recovery from non-debt resources. That's not going to be feasible or possible with the kinds of natural disasters that Jamaica is exposed to. However, you don't want to be in a position where you're scrambling to get those lines of credit after the event. Just imagine, and I'll use this illustrative a few times, but just imagine Jamaica, all of Jamaica having the St. Elizabeth has today. And in that context, rather than responding to constituents and working with other members of parliament to get people to lend you money, negotiating drafts of documents, sending them to the lawyers, going to the attorney general's chambers, marking documents up and sending them back, getting cabinet approval, getting parliamentary approval if required. You're having to do all of those things in the aftermath of an event that is St. Elizabeth scale. I suggest to you that is not what ideally you're going to be wanting to do in the advent of a storm. In the advent of a storm, you're going to want to just be able to access resources. And so having your contingent upon the passage of a natural disaster event is what you're going to have as ideal. But you recognize that in a very high severity situation, you may need other resources and paths that thankfully we're not going to need to draw on. But again, I mean, that's 20-year resources, 10-year moratorium. And it's great to have lines like that one can draw on if you encounter something that is severe enough. Then you have the elements of your quadrant that you want to transfer to either insurance markets or to capital markets. And Jamaica has the Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance Facility, which is a parametric insurance. And by parametric, what we mean, it's model based. So it's not based on actual loss, like an indemnity insurance, where you go with with your notepad and you make a note of all the losses and then you tally them up, and then you based on those losses, a payment is made. That's indemnity type insurance. What we have with CRIF is parametric insurance, where it's model based. And so in the aftermath of the storm, their proprietary models and determines whether a payout has indeed been triggered. Now, when we did and this graphic illustrates other areas that we will want to fill out. We're going to want to make sure that we have catastrophe. We want to make sure that the penetration of catastrophe insurance in the private market grows significantly. One of our weaknesses is that the last figures I saw was that it was lower than 20%, and that's not good because for obvious reasons. So we are working with the insurance industry to introduce that can make insurance more accessible for persons on low income. And that's something I've spoken about before. I won't elaborate on it here, but that's work in progress. Now, when we did sort of now the Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance Facility is insufficient if Jamaica were to experience a really high severity storm, i.e. a Category 5 event where the trajectory of the center of the storm passes over the landmass of Jamaica. Now, I don't know if anybody, can really imagine what. But I know some videos have been circulating about the wind that descended upon my alma mater, Monroe College, and I would probably tweet that. And perhaps if Monroe is 50 miles from the coast, 10 miles from the coast, as some would have been probably 40 to 50 miles away from Monroe. And when you see the ferocity of the wind, and you try to imagine what it would have been like if the center had passed over our landmass, the potential damage is not comfortable to contemplate. And if that were to happen, our analysis with the advice of the World Bank shows that respond to the emergency expenditures that would arise and the relief and the recovery costs that would become necessary. And that is the thinking that led to Jamaica becoming the first small state in the world to independently sponsor a catastrophe bond. Now, a catastrophe bond, or our catastrophe bond, is the top layer in our disaster risk framework, and it is designed to provide fiscal resources for the emergency expenditures that can arise from a very high intensity, let us say a category 5 or a high intensity category 4 of the storm passes over Jamaica. We have seen what happens when the center of the storm passes over a country. We saw it in Cayman with Ivan in 2004. We saw it with Ivan as well in Grenada in 2004. It's devastation and decimation. And if that happened without us having financial protection, it could set us back considerably. So we entered in our cat bond to protect against that possibility. Now, to the extent that there's interest, I can go into more detail. Jamaica pioneered not just a cat bond, but we pioneered something that is referred to as a cat in a grid, where the landmass of Jamaica is divided into, or let's put it, a grid is put over Jamaica and the surrounding waters, and the grid consists of squares and triangles, and each grid is associated with a centralized air pressure. The centralized air pressure correlates with the intensity of a storm. So in the same way that we know that the more intense a storm is, the higher the wind speed is going to be, the more reliable metric for severity is the centralized air pressure. But centralized air pressure is inversely proportional to the intensity of a hurricane. So the more intense the hurricane, the lower the centralized air pressure. And so in our catastrophe bond, each grid is associated with a centralized air pressure. And if the path of the hurricane goes through any of these grids, and the centralized air pressure of the hurricane is less than the threshold assigned to that grid at the time it goes through the grid, the cat bond triggers. And the centralized air pressures are chosen to ensure that if we have a direct hit from a category 5 or a high category 4, the bond would trigger. If you want me to go into even more detail, and here I have graphs and figures that I can share to the extent that there is interest, and we don't descend into the silliness of JLP, PNP, but we have a mature discussion about the future of our country and the best way to protect our country from the possibilities of these highly destructive events. Now, so let me say some more, and then I'll send a few images out. The catastrophe bond market is one where capital market investors are your counterparties. And it grew out of a realization that the insurance market is too small to cover the risks of natural disaster at the level of counties and states and countries and federal republics, etc. And to put numbers behind that, I shared this on an interview with Nationwide on Friday. The total capital, the equity capital of the insurance markets globally is less than $1 trillion US. I believe it's in the region of about 700 billion. And here I'm talking about general insurance companies. The market capitalization of the world stock markets, and if you is such that if those markets were to have, a big drop one day, that drop would exceed the total capital in the insurance market, if you understand what I'm saying. That is, if the world's global, if all the stock markets of the world, the entire capitalization dropped by 4% one day, it would exceed the entire capital in the general insurance industry. And we have not added the world's bond markets, which are several orders of magnitude bigger than the equity markets. I say that to say that the world's capital markets are huge, broad, and deep. And over the past 20 years or so, countries and states looking for disaster risk financing have sought to tap into global capital markets to find investors who are interested in products that are uncorrelated with the traditional assets that they invest in. They're uncorrelated with equities and bonds and real estate. And with a lot of intense quantitative modeling and novel quantitative modeling, are able, through intermediaries like the World Bank and other modeling companies that advise countries such as Jamaica and Mexico and Florida and Japan and so on, and Chile, are able to put instruments together that can provide this kind of protection in a very granular basis. So I would like to, well, let me back up a bit and say two more things on catastrophe bond, and then we can sort of open for questions, and I can possibly sort of share some more images that might be useful for the discussion. I want to just give you a couple of just things to illustrate, cat bond triggers. So in the modeling of the cat bond, clearly it would have been back tested against hurricanes that have passed Jamaica, and we'd want to be sure that it would have been triggered by certain hurricanes that were particularly problematic for us. And I'll just give you a few examples. Hurricane Ivan that passed in 2004 was the hurricane. We had a commemorative event that commemorated the 20th passing of Ivan recently, and that was held all across the Caribbean because it was such a devastating hurricane. I recalled earlier that it totally decimated Grenada. It submerged Cayman underwater, the entire Cayman Islands. It was Ivan that ended up leading to Dial Insurance going bankrupt. Ivan was, if I may use the phrase, a killer hurricane. But Ivan did not cross the landmass of Jamaica. But it was so intense. The centralized air pressure, if this means anything, was 924 millibars, which puts it way into the Category 5 level, and it makes it an intense Category 5 hurricane. Well, Ivan passed south of Jamaica, but because it was so powerful and the centralized air pressure was 924, it would have triggered this catastrophe bond. Similarly, Hurricane Dean in 2007 was also a very damaging hurricane. It passed south of Jamaica. The center of that hurricane did not pass over the landmass of Jamaica. Its centralized air pressure was 927, and it would have triggered the Category 5, it would have triggered the catastrophe bond. Hurricane Gilbert, a hurricane much less severe than either of Ivan or Dean. Hurricane Gilbert's centralized air pressure was 960, which puts it well outside of the Category 5 level. It was either a Category 3 or low Category 4, I can't necessarily recall. But at 960, passing over the landmass of Jamaica, and it certainly passed through Kingston, that would have also triggered the catastrophe bond that Jamaica has. Now, with respect to the Hurricane Beryl, and again, I can share these images to aid in public understanding. Hurricane Beryl would have started in the Eastern Caribbean, or in the just after it left Grenada and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It had a centralized air pressure of about 938, and at that level of intensity, had Hurricane Beryl maintained that intensity and took the exact same path, that intensity would have been much more damaging for Jamaica and would certainly have triggered the catastrophe bond. By the time Hurricane Beryl got into Jamaican waters, or into the waters that are covered by the grid, it was in the range of 959, which is far less intense than it was in the Eastern Caribbean. And you can use wind speed as well if you want to see the difference in wind speed between when it was there and when it was here. So that's what so now the question about, just the final thing on the catastrophe bond, is that if one can guarantee that a Category 5 hurricane will not pass over Jamaica, and a Category 5 will not pass on the shores of Jamaica, then we don't need a cat bond, if you can guarantee that. But if there's a possibility that it can, then we cannot leave ourselves exposed to that possibility. The purpose of having a cat bond is we don't want it to be drawn, because if it is drawn, it means that we have had a devastating experience. But while Jamaica is still in our development phases, while we only have single-digit billions in our natural disaster fund, we just cannot take the risk that we could experience a Category 5 hurricane, as we nearly did with Beryl, and we nearly did in 2016 with Matthew. We can't take the risk that we will experience that and leave ourselves entirely exposed. So Hurricane Beryl, back to our layers, the multi-layered framework that Jamaica has, the lower layers will be triggered, i.e. our natural disaster fund, our contingencies fund, the contingent credit claim. We'll see how much we are entitled to there and how much we need. It may be that we don't need to draw on it. And the preliminary information is that, not preliminary, it's not yet official, let us say. The unofficial is that our tropical cyclone policy from the Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance Facility has triggered, and that Jamaica will get a payout from that, and that will be in the order of about $2.5 billion. But it needs to be, this is unofficial, it needs to be confirmed. And I mentioned, this is model-based insurance. CRIF has run the models, and that is what the unofficial result is. It has to be validated externally, and that's according to documentation of CRIF. And once that has been finalized, it will be confirmed and will be made official. So Hurricane Beryl would have triggered a number of layers. And as I said in my video statement and release, the idea is that we don't have every hurricane triggering all levels. And certainly triggering our top level would mean that we have devastating damage all across Jamaica, which thank God isn't the case. And frankly, it's not something that we ever want to have happen. But we can't live according to our wishes alone. We have to be practical and realize that it could happen. And because it could happen, we cannot afford to leave ourselves exposed. Okay, that's it from me for this section, and I'll open up to any questions that anybody might have. Okay, I think there's somebody who has a question. Can you go ahead, please? Hello? Is this?
Hello, Minister. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes, yes.
Good afternoon, Minister. Thanks for having me this afternoon, and thanks for having this open forum concerning the layers, as you mentioned, of things we've put in place to protect us from tropical cyclones and hurricanes. The question I want to ask you, because I see this narrative being, some of the, everybody's throwing something against the wall to see if it will stick. But it seems like a concerted effort on this narrative being pushed that we're paying for this big bond, so to speak, to protect us against these types of hurricanes and storms. And yet still say the southern parishes all mash up, and something should be triggered bigger than what we have. And that's the narrative being driven. Can you dispel that notion for me, if you can, please, and just again reiterate that not every storm triggers every bond we have out there on the market?
Good. Okay, I think there's somebody who has a question. Can you go ahead, please? Hello? Is this?
Hello, Minister. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes, yes.
Good afternoon, Minister. Thanks for having me this afternoon, and thanks for having this open forum concerning the layer, as you mentioned, of things we put in place to protect us from tropical cyclones and hurricanes. The question I want to ask you, because I see this narrative in, some of the, everybody's throwing something against the wall to see if it will stick. But it seems like a concerted effort on this narrative being pushed that we're paying for this.
And so resources will be available
so
to intervene positively on behalf of the citizens who have been affected in St. Elizabeth and Clarke.
I would say more parishes than that, but I love the
let me I just use those because that's what you mentioned. Resources will be available to intervene on behalf of all the citizens in Jamaica who have been affected.
The thing I notice is that between yourself and the Prime Minister, the government, and most of the government members of Parliament are out there in the field. And I love that. I love the $5 million that you gave hours before the storm hit. So MPs that could go to their CDF, that could assist them to make quicker decisions on the ground. Now, I like some of those initiatives. And I like the way you guys have positioned yourself. Nothing of any great nature. I posted yesterday that you, both yourself and the Prime Minister, are weighing the conditions of the future and are preparing for them, but is governing the now. And I love that approach that you guys have taken. I don't want to take a lot of time because I could sing your praise from now till tomorrow
there, guys.
morning.
But
God bless you, sir. Have a nice evening, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for those comments. Okay, the next person. can you go ahead, please? I think.
I don't know. The interaction on his side doesn't seem to be smooth at all. And I think we can do much better than that. Look, these are important discussions. I just to have this discussion on Twitter with a breaking transmission and not so smooth interaction.
Mr. Vegas, I think that's you, person by the handle, Mr. Vegas.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Yes, Chief. Big up yourself.
Big up yourself, too.
Hey, man, I just want to say thank you for your service, your outstanding service. And the way that the government has thought this out ahead of whatever should arise. My question is, the resources that will be available, how soon will that resources be available for places that are in dire need of the resources at this time?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. So as was mentioned with the previous question, the first thing we did was to release resources through the parliamentarians, and that those have already gone out. I can speak for myself as a parliamentarian that, some persons affected have, received things already. So that program has started, and I know and I'd expect that this week, there's a cabinet meeting tomorrow where everything will be finalized, but I'd expect that this week you're going to see the relief efforts being stepped up with intensity, because we want to make sure that persons who have been affected receive proper responses and relief. Does it answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, Minister. Thank you so much.
Okay. I see Chadster the one.
Good evening, Minister.
Good evening.
Yes. My observation is that I had a lot of them, but I'll just make this important one. I think Jamaica should keep the category 5. Is it the cat bond?
It's called a cat bond, yeah.
Yeah, I think you should keep that one. Say, for example, you're buying a house. The higher the insurance is the more that your mortgage, So Jamaica, I'm just talking about Canada. The higher, say, for example, if you have $1 million insurance on each of the parties, and say the husband and the wife, it triggers a more lower payment. So I think you should keep that bond in place, because Jamaica will stay on that high trajectory. So people want to invest in the country knowing that there is a bond in place in case anything happens.
No, you make a good point that I did not mention. Thank you for that comment. But you made a very good point. I forgot to mention that having the catastrophe bond in place has led to our credit rating agencies viewing Jamaica's credit risk more favorably. And maybe I could post a link from one of the credit rating agencies that published something on that with our first cat bond, and published another thing with our second cat bond, saying how it reduces Jamaica's risk. Because again, if you look, ladies and gentlemen, God forbid that we have, a hurricane like of Beryl's strength in the Eastern Caribbean passing through Jamaica. God forbid. We have, so what the credit rating agencies looked at is, look, if that were to happen, Jamaica has not just one instrument, but it has a lot of instruments that can deliver resources that can help us to respond quickly. So I agree with you. And the current cat bond that we have it for 4 hurricane seasons, for the 2024, 2025, 2026, and 2027 hurricane season. After the 2027, then we'd have to renew it. But we have it for the next four hurricane seasons. But it's a kind of instrument that we have to have for 25 years, right? Jobs Media, here.
Thank you, Minister. I greet you well. And again, thank you for this opportunity to.
Tops Media?
Yes, sir. You hear me?
Okay, let's move on. In the bleak of midwinter?
Not hear me at all. Connection is a little bit warm there. Let's see if we can do it over on this side. I think we needed to do it on Twitter itself.
In the bleak of midwinter?
Yeah, greetings, Minister.
Greetings.
Question: can you tell us the uh, how much of these instruments will be geared towards rebuilding the country's infrastructure, as opposed to how much will be geared towards assisting people, individual families at the ground level? Is there a different instrument for each, or is the money going to be taken from all four that have been triggered and divided in a particular way? Please elaborate on that for us.
Yeah, excellent question. Excellent question. And you're probably a little bit ahead of us. That's what we're going to have to sort of work out this week. We have to bear in mind that this is the first hurricane of the 2024 season. Right? You remember we were taught in primary school, June too soon, July stand by, August a must, September remember, October all over. So this was a really June too soon hurricane. We still have all of July, all of August, all of September, all of October. So we're going to have to make sure that we pace ourselves and we don't leave ourselves totally exposed in the event that there's another storm later on in the hurricane season. So that is going to have to be factored in. The first priority is relief, and then recovery to make sure that we can reopen the economy and go back to normal activities. So that those two areas will certainly be the priorities. Reconstruction is something that we can, in every natural disaster, you stage and you plan over time to address. I couldn't give you direct proportions today, but I would say that relief and recovery is where the focus is going to be.
So,
Minister?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Just another quick question. Let's say the cat bond is compared to insuring a car.
Yes.
And let's say something happens to the car, like the car is totally written off, and you have to get that money from the insurance. In that case, your premium will become higher. Is that a situation? Would that be a factor in this situation if the bond was to trigger?
Excellent question. The price of the cat bond is based on over 100 years of hurricane data. Virtually every hurricane, every storm that has arisen in the Atlantic that has come the way of the Caribbean is in a database, and the trajectories are known, the wind speeds are known, the air pressure is known, and the probabilities can be easily calculated and assigned. I wouldn't expect there could be a psychological impact on the part of investors, but this is a very analytical area and very quantitative area. I wouldn't expect the probabilities to change from one trigger. One thing that affects pricing is the interest rate environment. Yeah, so we are in a much higher interest rate environment today. The risk-free rate is 5%. That's the rate you get for taking no risk at all. So that ups the cost of instruments where there is risk. So that has I would say a much bigger bearing on the cost of a cat bond than if you get a hit. I.e., if interest rates were to subside by the time we have to renew in 2027, and let's say the risk-free rate were no longer 5% at that point, but it were 3% or 2.5%, that would have a massive impact on the pricing of the cat bond, and a bigger impact than the occurrence of one single hurricane. But remember, even if there were a trigger this time around, we have the bond, as long as it's not exhausted, we have the bond until 2027.
Okay, Minister, thank you.
Okay.
Minister,
Yes, go ahead, please.
not to put you under any undue pressure, because I'm certain that some amount of analysis is still being done, but I'm not sure you answered my question. You said that the initial response is going to be what, recovery and no, relief and what else?
Relief and recovery.
Relief and recovery, right? So what
And
I
the definition of recovery is getting back up to, is reopening the economy. And by reopening the economy, I mean in every way possible, right? Whether it's the fishing sector of the economy, the bauxite sector of the economy, the markets, right? So the agriculture, I mean, it's reopening the economy.
Okay, understood. But when we have natural disasters, the country suffers at two levels. You have the individual level, the families losing their roofs and so on, and then there's damage to the country's infrastructure, roads, down the electricity poles, and so on. So what I had asked initially is how much money is going to be dedicated to each of those types of damage. But I understand you can't give us that now. But by when will we be able to know?
Yes, well, the estimates have to come in, right? The estimates and they are coming in. And we are going to, as the Prime Minister mentioned, that we're going to have to prioritize. It won't be possible to do all reconstruction at the same time. We're going to have to prioritize and program. So I'm not dodging your question. It's just that information is not yet available.
All right, we'll wait.
Make sense? Or all the information. But as I said, relief and recovery will get underway, almost immediately.
Okay, we'll stay tuned to Parliament.
Yes. C.A. Edwards.
Hello, Minister.
Hello.
I was listening from the beginning. So you did say relief, recovery, reconstruct. So so we're at the relief stage now, and the recovery is going to start as of tomorrow. That's what you're saying?
No, we are still in relief and recovery, right? So recovery, when you see people moving the branches from, the Norman Manley Road in Western Jamaica, right, to make it passable, or removing the trees that have fallen on the South Coast Road that has made it impossible. That's a part of recovery, right? So if you look on the graph, relief and recovery start at the same time. Relief can be more urgent because relief is really about human relief, right, and human needs, and so that relief has already started.
Okay.
But it will be expected to ramp up.
Yes. So after that, now we go into the reconstruction stage.
Correct.
Which probably will be another 6 months or so?
Yeah, well, it all depends on the extent of the damage, and National Works Agency is doing their assessment. Thank God, on a national level, this is on a national level. The damage is terrible in certain areas, but on a national level, this is nowhere as bad as we have experienced, in recent times. Certainly, this is not an Ivan, this is not a Dean, or any of those. But yes, the estimates have to come in, and then we can plan what needs to happen. Some things will happen quickly, some might take more time.
Thank you, Minister.
Good evening, Minister.
Yes. Who is that?
How are you?
I'm
this
good.
Is Clarke, sir.
Oh, thank you. How are you? Go ahead.
I'm very well, and I am very pleased with what I am hearing. And I don't have any questions per se, as I do understand what is happening, and the last hurricane I've been through was Hurricane Gilbert. Was a wicked one, but this program that I understand that I'm listening to you speak about, to me, I'm in the diaspora, so pardon me if I never heard about it before and it was existent before, but it's a new to me. And if it is new, I really appreciate this program because to me, this is a first in history, right? And we really need this in place. So I commend the government of Jamaica for implementing this and let's keep it going, right? And so that's just my little input for today. So big up yourself, Honorable Prime Minister, big up yourself and all members of Parliament.
No, thank you for that. And we're going to need, a nation to keep it going. No, this is not the way we did this. We did this, using the full instruments of policy. So a national natural disaster risk policy was promulgated and is now the policy of the country. And the process of making something the policy of the country, not the policy of a party, but the policy of the country, involves tabling a white paper in Parliament for everybody to see. And I invite you all to, right? That was tabled in Parliament and it stayed in Parliament for at least 6 months or more. And thereafter, the National Natural Disaster Risk Policy was taken around the country. There were town halls in the major cities, in Montego Bay, in Kingston. We had a big town hall in Halfway Tree with entertainment and speeches and discussions. We had town halls in Mandeville, and that's a part of the policy process in Jamaica. And then after that process, a green paper would have been tabled in Parliament, and there would be speaking opportunities after it was tabled. And after that, and I've just summarized it, after that, a lengthy process, the National Natural Disaster Risk Financing Policy became the policy of the country. So it is something that we have to keep going. We have to take responsibility for our vulnerability. If we want to be prosperous and we want to be independent at the same time, then it behooves us to take responsibility and to make sure that we won't be able to do everything for ourselves. No man is an island, no man stands alone. We'll always appreciate the donations from persons abroad, from institutions abroad, from countries abroad. But we have to stand on our own 2 feet and make provisions for ourselves prior to the occurrence of disaster. And Beryl is the first real test of our multi-layered disaster risk financing framework, and I'm happy to share and report that it has worked. We have 4 of the 5 layers triggering, and it has put us in a place where we don't have to scramble for resources to engage in the relief and recovery effort. So thank you for that comment.
You're welcome, my brother. Have a good one.
You too. Chris, how you on now? Christy? I'm sorry for mashing up the pronunciation. Or J. Paul? Gavin? Okay, these are people who have requested to speak. Not here. Yeah, I think it's Gavin Simpson. All right, Jerome. Owen Smith. Okay, looks like people have requested to speak, but they're not around. All right, Brazil King. Protecting Jamaica. Okay, so it looks like we're out of questions and we're out of comments. If there are no, let me just go one more time. If there are no more questions and no more comments, we can bring this to a close. Thank you for, let me go, any more questions going once?
Just an observation, Minister, if you could continue on another Sunday evening or sometimes that is convenient to you, and just give us some prior notice, and then you probably could go on live instead of spaces, so we can actually see some of the things that you're typing, putting up, and so forth, some of the graphs. Because right now we're just in the listening mode. We're not viewing anything. I don't know if, because I'm not savvy, techno savvy. Well, I'm not seeing anything when you're typing. So if we could go on live the next time, that we can actually see the graphs and so forth. Did you hear, Minister? Sorry about that.
Yes, I heard you. Sorry about that.
Yes, you heard me?
Yes, I heard you.
Okay. Yes,
Yes.
if we could go on live.
That's something that we could definitely look into.
Right.
Do we have something? I have, let me just go again. Gavin,
Come on, Gavin.
Robert, Nico Sam, Gigi, NMB, VMO, Brazil King.
Hello.
Hello.
Jamaica. Yes. Hello.
Hi. Hello.
All right, ladies before gentlemen, you want to go first?
Yes. Thank you, Minister. Nadine Matthews Blair here. I want to first start by saying that I am very grateful and impressed by the response by the government in terms of the preparation, but also kudos to our JPS and NWA and all the persons who have volunteered and gone down to St. Elizabeth, just jumping in to help to get Jamaica back to normal. Minister, my question is within the context of climate change and the fact that collectively Caribbean nations don't contribute a lot to global greenhouse gas emissions. Beryl formed very early, got very intense very quickly. And what the research shows is that we continue to become indebted because of these natural disasters, the rebuilding that comes with it, but also trying to invest in climate adaptation activities. And so my question is, now that we have the policy, which puts us in a position to be more independent and proactive, where are we as a nation from an advocacy standpoint on things like the Loss and Damage Fund that was created at COP27, advocating for debt relief tied to climate adaptation investments, those kinds of things, so that every 10 to 20 years, when there's an event, we're not getting in debt again to respond and rebuild.
First of all, Nadine, thank you for your recognition of the hard work being done by many public servants, NWA, and people in private companies like the JPS and public bodies like NWC, who also have families, also have loved ones who they're concerned about, yet they're on the line for serving their fellow citizens. I want to join you in recognizing and applauding their effort. You have some big questions there, Nadine, on loss and damage fund. First of all, that side of it is on the climate change side, the climate change division, which is in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. It's on the environment portfolio on the Ministry of what I would say is that Jamaica, along with other Caribbean states, continue to argue for that promise to be realized and to be real for the advanced economies to make good on their commitments, given the source of the climate change problem. You're correct in observation that the history of the Caribbean and our problem with indebtedness is not all due to flagrant and bad policy. Some of it is due to the debt that is naturally accumulated in the wake of natural disaster, especially where no disaster risk financing was put in place. And there are discussions about how those can be addressed. Jamaica has to be careful about the nature of our advocacy in that area, because you can have contamination in market spaces with one thing that we aim to do is to keep the yield and the interest paid on our bonds very low. And if investors believe that we need debt relief in order to survive, then the pricing of our bonds just goes up. So the nature of the advocacy in that area has to be delicate and has to be very pointed. I hope I've sort of answered your question, acknowledging that those are areas that we continue to work on in collaboration with our other CARICOM neighbors.
Yes, thank you for that, Minister. And I will try and connect with the ministry that you mentioned to learn more about our specific positions, because it's an area that I am passionate about.
Yeah, well, I encourage you to do so. And thank you so much for your comment. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, there's someone who was I don't know who it is. Can you go ahead?
I think that would be me, Minister. Good evening.
Okay, go ahead. Who is it?
This is Nicholas. Nicholas. My name is Nicholas. Okay. My question that I'd like to ask is, it's about the cat one. Are we only covered for hurricanes? Could it be triggered if there's an earthquake? And if it's triggered for an earthquake, how is that triggered come about?
Okay, so good question. The cat bond is just for what is the common phrase is tropical cyclones, i.e. hurricanes and those kinds of events, not for earthquakes. For earthquake, we have some coverage under the Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance Facility. It's not large, but we do have an earthquake policy with them. The credit contingent claim, we have added earthquake to it as well. So those two layers, earthquake is represented. Certainly all of those, the National Disaster Fund, the Contingency Fund, credit contingent claim, and our CRIF policy. But the cat bond is just for hurricanes.
Okay, thank you, Minister.
Good evening, Minister.
Go ahead.
Hope all is well.
Yes, thank you.
Great. All right. So my question to you is, are there any particular standards in place that dictates the SLA for essential services? And by essential services, I would mean or JPS or water, NWC, or flow and digital.
Right. That question is really beyond the scope of this call. This call is about disaster risk financing, and which falls squarely in my portfolio. Those areas do not fall in my portfolio, and one of the disciplines that we have to observe as cabinet members and cabinet colleagues is to, it wouldn't be profitable. Not profitable is the word. There are disadvantages to me sort of speaking out on those areas because I may not have the latest information. So
Okay.
not
Okay.
answer your question, but it just wouldn't be probably wise.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yes, good evening, Minister.
Evening. Just tell me
Yes,
who
this is Gigi Garvin. I just had
Garvin.
one Garvin, yes.
Gigi, yes, Garvin. I see you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Just one quick question. I just wanted to find out, the relief funds, would it only cover public infrastructure or would private dwellings, and what does it really cover?
Okay. So, I mean, the public policy around relief ought to be directed towards those in need. And how do you measure need? Right. One is those who are vulnerable prior to the storm, who are affected, right? So persons in low income households who have been affected and so on. But you could also have persons who were not vulnerable before the storm, who are made vulnerable by the storm as well. So the idea behind relief, public policy, is that it goes to people who are in need. Does that answer your question?
Oh, okay. So yes, it does. It's I wanted to kind of understand the scope, and then how would we determine then who gets that relief, and is it actual cash in hand, or is it the government will ensure that what is actually what the relief that is needed is actually direct, and is there a report done afterwards so we can see some type of accountability or audit?
Excellent questions. You will remember from our experience with COVID that we went about it in a very transparent way, where every person who got COVID funds is known because it was on an electronic. In that case, it was a digital platform, and we had it audited by the Auditor General and so on. We may or may not use a similar approach, but what the feature that will be similar is that we will be very transparent in what we do. So far, the interventions have been, through the Constituency Development Fund, and those have been, goods in kind. Have been, intervention with food baskets and with supplies from hardware stores, building materials, and so on. I can give you the principles that will sort of guide what we will do, as the Prime Minister has mentioned. I wouldn't be able to, at this point, give you the specifics, but the principle, Gigi, is that we're going to be transparent in what we do. And that it is going to be, to he or she who is in need, regardless of any other criteria.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. Good evening. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Gigi. Okay. Anybody else from those who have been recognized as speakers?
Yes, Minister.
Go ahead. Who is this?
Brazil King.
Brazil King. Please go ahead.
Yes, as it relates to flooding and water that was after burial that was left in low-lying areas, what measure is being put in to deal with the possibility of mosquito and waterborne diseases? And going forward, is there going to be any plan, and say public education on disasters that might affect us, instead of a week before a disaster, something is put out, but something ongoing to like a public education to members of the public about natural disasters and how they affect us. And finally, how does this, if in any way, affect your upcoming Spark program?
Okay, good questions. Absolutely agree with you. Public education has to be continuous because there's so much that we can do on the disaster risk financing. We also need citizens to take personal responsibility to not cut down trees and put them in gullies. We have at least one episode where that has led to tremendous flooding that has caused hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of damages to several homes because of backed up water rushing out of gullies with a ferocity that cannot be comprehended as a result of blocked drains. Also, as you mentioned, how to treat with the aftermath of disaster. As you walk around communities, yes, you're absolutely right. You see a lot of containers that are filled with water, and we're going to need to make sure that we don't harbor mosquitoes. So you're going to see. I think I have already seen public education from the Ministry of Health, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see that stepped up and continued. And it might very well mean that for the remainder of the season, we might have to engage in some kind of collective activity to make sure we are prepared for any for the rest of the hurricane season. And then your second question was
the Spark program.
Right, Spark program. Right, yes. Right. Look, we're committed to the Spark program, committed to making it happen. I mean, so I would just leave it at that for the moment. As I said, it's way too early to go beyond that because estimates are not all in, right? Obviously, there will be a level beyond which things could be affected, but I don't think we're there yet. But I don't want to be too definitive either.
I follow you.
So we're committed to the Spark program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brazil Cake. Okay. Anybody who has their microphone unmuted, who has a question? There are several people with their microphone unmuted. All right, Carol Narcisse, are you there? Be opulent.
Hello, Minister.
Yeah, hi, Carol.
Hi. Good evening to you and to everybody else gathered on the forum. And I don't know if you've addressed this question already. If you have, then just say and move on.
Sure.
So your